I was sipping my morning coffee when I saw a family unloading paddle boards and coolers on my private land. They said they'd paid $75 for lake access through the HOA website, but I never authorized a single thing. Turns out the HOA president had listed my lake online without permission, charging people for fake access to property she didn't own. So I did what any landowner would do. I bought the land next to hers and built a fence so tall it ended her HOA reign for good. The sound of car doors slamming shattered the peaceful morning quiet of my ranch. I looked up from my coffee to see a minivan parked by my private gate and 4 people unloading paddle boards and coolers like they owned the place. They walked right past my private property sign, chatting excitedly about their lake day. I set down my mug and headed toward them. They excused me, this is private property. The lake isn't open to the public. A woman in designer sunglasses turned to me with a confused expression. But we booked this online. Paid $75 for the day. Look. She pulled out her phone and showed me a booking confirmation for Peaceful Waters Lake access. My stomach dropped. That was my lake, and I'd never authorized any booking system. Where exactly did you book this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She scrolled to her phone. Through the Riverside Estates HOA community page. The listing said it was a new amenity for residents and guests. Riverside Estates, of course, and I knew exactly who was behind this. Let me back up a bit. I'm David Thornton, and I've owned this 100-acre ranch for 15 years. The property includes a pristine 20-acre lake that I've kept private and protected. My land sits just outside the Riverside Estates HOA boundaries, which has been both a blessing and lately a curse. About 6 months ago, a new HOA president took power, Patricia Hartwell, though everyone just called her Karen for obvious reasons. She was in her early 50s, always impeccably dressed, and had the personality of a drill sergeant crossed with a used car salesman. From day one, she'd been eyeing my property like a hawk. It started with subtle suggestions at community meetings I'd attended as a courtesy to my neighbors. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could expand our community amenities, she'd say, looking directly at me. That beautiful lake just sitting there and unused by the community. I'd politely declined every time. The lake was my private sanctuary, home to native fish species I'd carefully cultivated, and a nesting ground for local waterfowl. But Karen didn't understand the word no. She'd escalated her campaign over the months. First came the letters on official HOA letterhead, suggesting I consider opening the lake for supervised community events. Then the surprise visits, where she'd show up with potential committee members to discuss the benefits of sharing resources. Each time, I firmly but politely refused, but listing my lake online without permission, this was a whole new level of audacity. After sending the confused family away with sincere apologies and a promise to sort this out, I went straight to my computer. Sure enough, there it was on the Riverside Estates website. A professional-looking listing, complete with photos of my lake taken from the road, pricing packages, and even fake reviews praising the peaceful atmosphere and excellent fishing. The listing claimed the lake access was a new partnership between the HOA and local landowners to enhance community value. It listed Patricia Hartwell as the contact person. I printed everything and called my lawyer, Janet Morrison, immediately. She's charging people to access your private property without your consent? Janet's voice was incredulous. David, this is textbook fraud and trespassing and about 5 other violations I can think of off the top of my head. What do you recommend? I asked. We could send a cease and desist immediately, file charges, sue for damages, Janet rounded off. But let me do some digging first. Sometimes with people like this, there are more strategic approaches. Over the next week, I documented everything. More families showed up with booking confirmations. I politely turned them away and collected their information for potential witnesses. I installed security cameras to capture the trespassing attempts. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down, sending me an email suggesting I was being selfish and hurting property values by not sharing the lake. Then Janet called with some interesting news. David, you're not going to believe this. The property adjacent to yours, the 5-acre lot that borders both your land and Karen's house, just went on the market. The Millers are divorcing and need a quick sale. The Miller property was strategic. It formed a buffer between Karen's house and the only decent access point to my lake from the Riverside Estate side. If someone owned that lot, They could completely control access from the neighborhood. What are you thinking? I asked, though I suspect that I already knew. I'm thinking that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. I have a real estate attorney friend who specializes in anonymous purchases through limited liability companies. The plan came together quickly. I formed an LLC called Pine Valley Investments and made an all-cash offer on the Miller property, $20,000 over asking. In a volatile market, they jumped at it. The sale closed in 2 weeks, and Karen had no idea who the new owner was. The day after closing, I hired a construction crew. They showed up at 7 a.m. sharp to install an 8-foot privacy fence along the entire border between the Miller property and Karen's land. It was completely legal, up to code, and absolutely blocked her view of and access to the lake. The first sign of trouble came around noon. Karen's silver luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of the construction site. She emerged like a hurricane in yoga pants, her face already red with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked at the construction foreman. "You can't put a fence here. This blocks the lake access." The foreman, a calm man named Roberto, who dealt with difficult neighbors before, simply shrugged. "We're following the property owner's instructions, ma'am. Everything's permitted and legal." "Who owns this property? I demand to speak with them immediately." "You'd have to contact Pine Valley Investments, ma'am. I just build fences." I watched the entire exchange from my security camera feed, sipping coffee on my porch. The next few hours were entertaining. Karen made at least 15 phone calls, growing more agitated with each one. She tried the county recorder's office, the real estate agent, even called the police, who politely informed her property owners had the right to fence their land. By evening, she'd somehow figured out how to contact my LLC's registered agent, which was my lawyer, Janet. The voicemail she left was a masterpiece of entitled rage. "I know this is David Thornton's doing," her recorded voice screeched. "This is harassment. That fence is blocking established community lake access. I'll sue. I'll have him arrested. The entire HOA board will hear about this." Janet called me laughing. "Want me to respond?" "Not yet. Let's see what her next move is." I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Saturday, chaos erupted. 12 families showed up with Lake Day reservations. They couldn't access the lake because of the new fence. Karen had to meet them at the blocked entrance, refunding their money from her own pocket while making increasingly desperate excuses. But the real fireworks started Monday morning when I received an official notice from the HOA demanding I remove the fence and cease interfering with community lake access. They'd called an emergency board meeting for Wednesday evening. Perfect. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I showed up to the meeting with Janet and a thick folder of evidence. The community center was packed. Karen sat at the board table, radiating smugness, clearly thinking she had me cornered. "Before we begin," I said, standing up, "I'd like to clarify something. This fence you're complaining about, it's on property I recently purchased. I have every right to fence my own land." Karen's face went white. You bought the Miller property through Pine Valley Investments?" "Yes." "Completely legal. Just like property owners have the right to fence their land, they also have the right to control access to their property." Which brings me to my next point. I opened my folder and began distributing copies of documents to the board members. These are screenshots of an unauthorized booking system charging people to access my private lake, my lake on my property, which sits outside HOA jurisdiction. This constitutes fraud, theft by deception, and criminal trespassing. The board members' expressions shifted from confused to alarmed as they reviewed the evidence. "Furthermore," I continued, "here are signed statements from 37 families who paid for lake access they were not legally entitled to, security camera footage of trespassing, and a particularly interesting email from Ms. Hartwell suggesting I was, quote, selfish for not sharing my private property." One board member, an elderly man named Thomas, cleared his throat. "Patricia, is this true? Did you list this man's private lake online without permission?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I was trying to increase community value. The lake was just sitting there, unused."
"It's my private property," I said firmly. "You had no right to list it, charge people for access, or pocket that money." Which raises another question. Where did all those booking fees go? The room went silent. Another board member, a woman named Sandra, leaned forward. "Patricia, did you keep the money from these bookings?" "It was for the HOA," Karen protested weakly. "Administrative fees for managing the amenity." "Show us the deposits," Thomas demanded. "If this was official HOA business, there should be records." Karen's face went from white to red to purple. I was going to transfer it. I just hadn't gotten around to it yet." Janet stepped forward. "My client is prepared to file criminal charges for fraud, theft by deception, trespassing, and harassment. However, he's willing to consider alternatives if the board takes appropriate action." The emergency meeting devolved into chaos. Board members demanded Karen's immediate resignation. Heated arguments erupted about liability and potential lawsuits from defrauded families. Someone mentioned contacting the district attorney. Karen tried to regain control, pounding her gavel and shrieking about proper procedures, but nobody was listening anymore. The vote to remove her as HOA president was unanimous, with Karen unable to vote on her own removal. But that wasn't the end. As news spread through the community, more consequences piled up. The real estate company Karen worked for part-time launched an ethics investigation after multiple clients complained. Families who'd been turned away from the lake demanded full refunds plus compensation for ruined weekend plans. The final blow came 2 weeks later. I was working on my dock when a process server walked up. "Are you Patricia Hartwell?" he asked, looking confused. "No, I'm David Thornton. This is my property. Karen lives in Riverside Estates." He checked his papers. "Right, but this lists her new address as the adjacent lot." That's when I learned Karen had panic sold her house at a massive loss, hoping to buy the Miller property from Pine Valley Investments. She'd actually submitted an offer to Janet's office, not knowing it was my LLC. Janet had politely declined, citing the owner's intention to keep the property indefinitely. The process server eventually found Karen at her mother's house across town. She was being sued by the district attorney's office for fraud and theft by deception. 17 counts, one for each family she'd scammed before I shut down her operation. 3 months later, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Karen had pleaded guilty to reduced charges. She avoided jail time, but received 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay $23,000 in restitution and fines. The last time anyone saw her in Riverside Estates was when she came to collect her things from her foreclosed house. Roberto, the fence contractor, happened to be there installing a decorative gate on my new property. He told me she sat in her car for 20 minutes staring at the fence that had ended her HOA reign before driving away. I kept the Miller property and turned it into a small nature preserve, planting native trees and creating a butterfly garden. The new HOA board, much more reasonable than their predecessor, even gave me a Community Beautification Award for improving the neighborhood's aesthetic value. As for the fence, I had a sign installed on it. In elegant lettering, it reads, "Private Property." In the end, Karen learned that no amount of fake authority or HOA titles can override the truth or trespass on private land. What started as petty entitlement turned into a full-blown legal scandal that cost her everything: her position, her career, her reputation, and nearly her freedom. And all it took to stop her was a fence, a lawyer, and a little patience. Have you ever had to deal with an HOA president who thought they owned more than they actually did? Or caught someone using your property like it was theirs? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap that bell so you don't miss the next real-life HOA takedown. Because when neighbors stand their ground, even the boldest Karens get fenced out for good.